Welcome back to the Gauntlet. This is episode 3, and we're continuing with 25 NL reviews for now. Today's contestant has wished to be named as Jay, and he's even sent us a rather impressive graph of his poker career so far. Jay has done something kind of unthinkable, unspeakable, and actually grinded 2NL, 5NL, and 10NL. This is an interesting approach. The advantages to this are that if you're heavily losing, it stems the bleed and it gives you kind of cheap/free education because you're playing for very low stakes. The downside is that if you're actually a winning player, it takes a very long time to play this many hands, and you might ask yourself, should I just have moved up sooner? Poker's not a computer game. You don't have to complete level 1 to play level 5, and therefore I very much recommend an investment-heavy strategy, both to poker education, but also to what stake you play as well. And I think avoiding the micro stakes rake traps of 2NL, 5NL, and 10NL is an extremely sensible strategy whenever you've got the game to support it. I don't recommend that people who would be heavily losing at 25NL plus start there, but if you do think you've stabilized and you would survive in a game like that, I wouldn't play these low stakes. So I don't actually know at which stake exactly this graph is at because it's been sent over in big blinds, but Jay did tell me that he has had a lot of success at these lower stakes 2NL, 5NL, 10NL, playing what is clearly a very red line centric style. So I'd expect with Jay what we're going to see is most of his leaks come in the form of aggressing in the wrong spots rather than being too passive. This is an insanely winning red line, and usually with a player that's playing low stakes that has a red line like this, a lot of the aggression is good and is working out against pool. But when you start to move up into stakes where people defend a bit more and figure out what you're doing, you can hit a bit of a roadblock there. And I'm curious as to whether that's what's happened here at 25NL, or whether this is just a bit of a downswing at the end of this graph. But let's get into episode 3 of the Gauntlet. We've got 10 hands queued up here. I have not seen them before. Each one's going to get a score out of 10. And yeah, the current season score to beat is a 56.5 out of 100, which was achieved by our contestant in episode 2. So good luck to Jay. Let's see how he gets on. Okay, so in the first hand for today, we have the King-Queen offsuit. We are in at the small blind. It's an open from the button, and we go for the 3-bet. Button calls, and we proceed to a flop of King-9 ace. We start off with a big c-bet here. I don't actually love this right off the bat with this hand. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You probably can play some big c-bets on a board like this, and maybe you can big c-bet this hand in theory, just about. But I think what's going to happen in reality is that you're just going to get tons of folds from any pocket pair. You might get called by like some 10-9 and stuff like that. I just think you're going to make yourself too much of a dog against the continuing range by going for the sizing. So I'd recommend either, if you are using a bigger sizing, you keep it as an exploitative thing and just do it with your really high EV stuff, or you use a small bet and bet a hand like this. But I don't really love betting this hand for half pot. It's not horrible. Listen, it's not like a disaster. I just don't think it's optimal against pool because I think they're going to be a bit too timid with some of the weaker stuff, like the gut shots and the underpairs that they're meant to continue with here. So not a massive fan of this, but I don't think it's like a total disaster. Onto the turn, I think this is a pretty clear check. We, theoretically speaking, at least we don't want to bluff this far up into our range. We have other pans here like pocket 10s, jack 10, underpair, 10-9, etc. that we can start bluffing with on this node. Even something like Queen Jack is like a bit more sensible than King Queen. So I think this is just a check. Let's see what happens. We go for this really small block bet. Now this is so similar to a check that I can't really fault it. It might also have the advantage of just allowing us to realize more equity. If we check here, we're probably going to face a stab more often than we're going to face a raise if we do this. And that's somewhat of an optical illusion that we're pulling over our opponent's eyes there, because actually there's really no difference from betting 1/12 pot and checking. For the most part, it's extremely similar. But I do think people are probably going to under raise here with certain hands that they would probably bet. That said, it's not too difficult to find raises with 2 pair plus in this spot. I don't mind this at all. I think it's is viable. You're going to get called by a few worse hands still, like Queen Jack and Jack 10 or some spade draw or something. And because you're betting so tiny, it's hard to say that this is a polarization mistake, and it might allow you to realize a little bit more equity on average because you do have the redraw to the straight here. So yeah, I think the Queen of Spades blocker will be somewhat useful to have on a 10 river as well. That's the 10 of Spades, because the 10x is going to be the Queen X of Spades is going to be the predominant flush draw in the button's range here. So yeah, I think this is fine. We reach the river now, and there's clearly some showdown value to checking. There could be some rationale for saying that villain has a very capped range now because they've not raised the tiny bet on the turn. That said, is it the case that we want to try and make our opponent fold here? Do we want to try and make villain fold all the combos of like ace 4, ace 5, ace 8 suited, ace 10 suited, ace queen? This is probably the bulk of the opponent's range here, but undoubtedly there's going to be like king 10, there's going to be king queen, there's going to be queen jack, there's going to be jack 10, there's going to be some air hand that just totally whiffed. We do go for the jam here. This is interesting. This is definitely, I think, an overfolded node. So this doesn't feel as ridiculous to me as it might look to you at first glance. There is a lot of showdown value here to checking though. Like I still think that you're doing all right by checking here. So this needs to exceed its fold equity target by quite a lot. Do you know what? The more I look at this, I don't actually mind this. This is kind of like an absurd line that the solver's not going to take. It's going to think this is a polarization mistake. But I do think pool is going to get funneled here, or filtered here in a way that's like kind of exploitatively good for us, because when we bet this small on the turn, I do think that like 2-pair combos for the most part are going to have a hard time not raising. And so if we do think the opponent's range is quite void of 2-pair plus, this works really well in the river. And this is like a kind of exploit micro-stake strategy that works well up until a certain point, then it doesn't work at higher stakes, where you bet tiny, you kind of manipulate and funnel the opponent's range in a certain way, and then you suddenly just like lay down the hammer here and say like what you're going to do with all those ace-x combos. I think this is all right, actually. I'm really not sure how good this is on the river. The theory part of me is like wanting to hate it, but the exploit part of me is kind of wanting to like it. Overall, I think this is a reasonably played hand. I'm going to give this hand a 7, even though it's kind of weird and some of you might hate it. Let me know what you think about this hand in the comments. I don't think it's quite so clear as, oh, it's just spew. I don't think it's that clear. I'm going to give it a 7. I'm somewhat impressed here, though I don't love the flop line. That feels a little bit too barbaric, like just like running at villain with a club for no reason when you've got second pair right off the bat. I don't think that's right, but I think overall 7 out of 10 is fair. All right, a really good start for Jay here, living up to his red line centric graph. Ace queen in the big blind. We go for the cold 4-bet. I love this sizing because what we're doing is we're saying against small blind, it doesn't really matter how big we make it. Effectively, we're going to end up all in here when small blind continues almost always anyway. And we want to save as much money as possible when the button is going to jam. So this is a really shrewd 4-bet size in this situation and a great way to exploit stack depth here. I think far too many people are autopiloty pre-flop in nodes like this, so already a big fan, and I think this is a nice little touch here for sure. This has impressed me. Jay could be a real contender, guys. I'm feeling this. I'm feeling good vibes. Okay, so the recreational player calls. I would just check the flop here. The reason I would check is the SPR is 0.5. If you jam, you might get calls from worse, right? Like some recreational players are just calling off Jack 10 here. But I think I'd rather just let them bluff. I'd rather they stuck the rest in with their entire range, and there's going to be an extremely high bite frequency when you check back here, where they just try to make you fold on the turn and they just jam their 10-9 or whatever. So although we're giving a free card here by checking back, and although we're probably in okay shape if we stick it in, it doesn't really matter that much, you know, what our equity is here at these pot odds. I still think I would check and just allow the opponent to spew maximally on the turn. I don't actually hate this because ace queen is such a good ace high, and like you are in some way value betting here against what could be like a really, really wide range. But no, I think I definitely prefer checking back. So I think a slight mistake here. We do get this in and we lose to ace king suited. I think this hand is so impressive pre-flop. I really love the sizing. The flop is a bit of a misstep, but pre-flop has really impressed me. I'm going to give this hand a 6.5 because I don't think flop's like a massive disaster at this SPR. And I think the pre-flop sizing is just a really nice touch that is hard for people to find. And I think what I want to reward on Poker Gauntlet is mostly stuff that's not so easy to do that people are getting right. So yeah, 6.5 for hand 2. This is definitely the best start to Poker Gauntlet I've ever seen. Ace queen suited now. We go for another small cold 4-bet. Okay. So again, it's a similar situation where like this sizing makes a lot of sense against this stack and just isolating against this stack, losing the minimum if they jam or something and we end up folding. So again, this makes sense. Same play. And this is not a hand that we really want to talk about. Just getting in here again against ace king. What are the chances of that? Okay, that doesn't count as hand 3. That's just like a weird pre-flop spot. Okay, so we'll make this hand the real hand 3. So we 3-bet with ace queen of hearts here. And we go to a flop of 10-3 deuce. We go for quarter pot here. Technically speaking, this is the board you want to use bigger bets on. It's not clear to me that like with this hand in a vacuum at these stakes that there's anything wrong with this. I don't think there's anything wrong with checking. It's not totally clear like whether I like a small bet, a big bet, or a check with this hand. They all seem pretty close. 10 of hearts on the turn, and we go for a pseudo check, 3.2 big blinds. This is obviously Jay's little pet weapon. And listen, I really don't mind it. It's going to lure people out of their comfort zone. 10% pot is like it's like a deep dark forest seeking line. And by that, what I mean is I'm obviously quoting Mikhail Tal, the chess player here again. You want to lure your opponent into the deep dark forest. You want to take them out of your comfort zone, put them in a realm where they can make more mistakes. So yeah, I don't actually hate this. I don't think if you bet 10% pot that it can really be a polarization mistake. I think that's a very difficult thing to exist at 10% pot. And then on the river, I think you've just got like a ton of showdown value on this node, and you should just definitely be checking and not bluffing this hand. Okay, good to see Jay give up here. So this hand was played fine. I don't think there's too much to say about it, though. I'm just going to give it a nice, healthy 6.5, because I think the turn line is kind of cute and probably does okay here. And Jay's obviously understanding the polarization on the river as well. I'll give this hand a 6.5. Actually, I'll give it a 6, because it's just like a kind of basic spot where there's not too much to say. Okay, we have queen 10 here, hand number 4. We're in the small blind, and we min 3-bet. Like, this doesn't even do a great job of isolating, right? And yeah, the hand is like a thin 3-bet. But I think you can just 3-bet bigger, or you can just cold call. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say that this is like as bad as it looks, because like, can it really be that much worse than cold calling? Well, yeah, because you're reopening, right, for no reason here. So yeah, the reason this is bad is that it has the same function as calling, but it reopens for the button, for the under the gun player, so that if they do have ace king, they can just 4-bet you off your hand. Or if they do have kings, they can 4-bet you off their hand. Or if they have a 4-bet bluff, they can 4-bet you off their hand. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I don't really see what we're doing here. Maybe this is a misclick, like it's entirely possible, but I'm going to have to mark down this hand. We can't be giving people free passes for potential misclicks on the gauntlet. And from all of the really weird small sizes I've seen from this player so far, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is odds on just a genuine line. Okay, so we do get 4-bet, I guess this is. And already this hand is looking like pretty indifferent. I guess calling can't be too bad. I wonder if you can actually just fold at this point, just given the SPR is coming down. This is going to be a really strong range. You're out of position. You can probably fold here, actually. I don't think queen 10 is going to play super well on this node. And I think, honestly, in this spot, equity realization is just abysmal against the pool. I mean, if we call here, the problem is that because this is a recreational-looking player who 4-bet, and I'm just going to guess that that 4-bet size is a bit recreational. It might not be. It could be a reg as well. But in any case, it's a 25 and L under the gun opponent who's 4-bet you. The equity realization is going to be very low. When villain has a very strong range, you're typically going to realize less equity than normal because they're just going to be value betting again on the next street. And so even if you do turn a jack or a spade here or a 10 or a queen, I don't think there's going to be a great world for continuing. I don't think check jam is going to be very high EV. I don't think check call is going to be very high EV. I think the bet's coming really frequently. And the world where you A, hit something and the turn goes check, check, and then you hit the river, really unusual. And the world where it goes check, check on turn and you miss, I think the fold equity on river is not great there. You're just running into like queens and stuff like that really often. So I think I would just fold the flop here. I don't think we can even continue. I think it's one of these spots where it looks like we should continue with the backdoors, but we definitely shouldn't. So I think this is a bit of a leak. We turn the queen on the diamond. This is a grim spot. Villain does predictably bet the turn. I would fold here. I don't think that you can, again, realize 25% of the pot by calling. People just aren't 4-bet bluffing in these games and double barreling flush runouts in 4-bet pots. It's just not a thing that's going on at any real frequency. So you want to get the hell out of there. Really good turn fold. So Villain's definitely got some, I want to say, flair to his game where he's not afraid to go ahead and make some folds in spots where others wouldn't, take some unconventional lines. Definitely 10 out of 10 for thinking outside the box and not being afraid to follow your own instinct. I do think pre-flop here is just dicey. I think flop is dicey. I'm going to have to give this hand a low score, although it is redeemed somewhat by the turn fold. I'm going to give this hand a 4 out of 10. It could have been a lot worse, though, if Hero had called the turn here. We could easily be looking at a 1 or a 2 or something. So 4 out of 10 for this one. All right, what's Wild J going to do next? What pre-flop treats are in store for us here? Decided that his name is Wild J from this point onwards. Maybe when we have him on the show one day, we'll say introducing Wild J. On the button with Ace-10 offsuit. So this looks like a recreational player. Depending how loose this player is, I'm just going to turn on the HUD here and see if we had any data. You guys won't see this, but I'm just going to take a look. 24-18. Looks like a reggy open size. Small sample, but definitely I think just a fold pre-flop in that case. High rake game. The thing is that the way 25 and L is going to get you with rake is it's going to get you in rake cap, meaning that like when you play a really big pot, you get raked a lot of big blinds for the game. So 3-betting this hand here is definitely not really very good. Oops, we turned the cards off by accident. Calling this hand just feels a little bit losing, like not terrible by any means, but I think I would just avoid this pre-flop. If there's a really bad player in the small blind or big blind, possibly you can, and small blind does look to be 45-41 so far. So maybe you can stretch to this. It does feel a little bit too loose though. Ace-3 deuce, okay. Villain goes for half pot. We decide to call, seems pretty standard. And Villain bets the turn. And we raise. Right. Okay, this is super interesting. Jay is not afraid to turn hands with tons of showdown value into bluffs, right? We can see that. And again, when you first look at this, you might just think this is really bad. However, I do think that bet size equals hand strength very, very often at these stakes. Villain is probably mostly going to have ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack here when they have an ace, right? They could have something like 2-pair or ace-5, but they probably have a 5 really infrequently. My gut would have been to just fold here against the reg if I wasn't going to raise, but turning this into a bluff raise, it's an incredibly believable high fold equity spot. And actually, again, I think Jay's picking up on, I can't believe I'm liking this. This looks like nonsense. This looks like utter garbage. But I can kind of see what he's doing. If Villain has a flush draw, they probably just call here, which is raising for value against that region. If Villain has ace, jack, ace, queen, ace, king, and is betting this turn a bit too mergy, they're probably going to fold a ton here. If not now, then perhaps on the river. I may have just gone bigger and one and done here just to make sure that I'm not like attacking 2-pair sets and stuff on the river. I may have just gone a bit bigger here and then just check back river, hoping they're just going to fold like ace, jack, ace, queen, ace, king now, but call flush draws. I think this is a really good spot to attack against the bet size equals hand strength kind of read like this. This is so weird. I would never have thought to do this with ace-10. But if your hand is dropping down to becoming a fold, yet you think the villain is capped and the main thing you're losing to is just like slightly better made hands, then turning it into a bluff probably does make some sense. Villain calls in and leads the river. I'm definitely just folding here. This range is way too strong now. It's probably mostly flushes actually. You've just run into. Really good fold. Man, this player is so weird. Like, I've never reviewed a guy like this before. This guy is like literally insane, but like not in a bad way, and I can see why they're winning. I wonder where Jake got his poker education from, because like we do teach some stuff like this in Carrot Poker School and in Grade E and in Cash Injection, but I don't think I've ever taught anyone to turn ace-10 into the bluff in a spot like this on the turn. I don't think I'd even think about this if I was playing a session, I'll be totally honest, but I don't hate it. And I like the river fold a lot. I don't like pre-flop. I think pre-flop were just a little bit too spewy. I don't think it's terrible though. Again, I don't think I can give this a bad score because I see what we're trying to do here and it makes sense against the main region of Villain's range that I think we're going to run into. So against my better judgment, perhaps, I'm going to give this hand... I'm going to give this hand an 8. I'm going to give this hand a fucking 8, guys. Because while I don't love pre-flop, I think the river is a really good fold, and I think it's quite an easy fold, but it's a good fold. And I think the turn is a super imaginative way to say, oh, so you've got ace, queen, ace, king, ace, jack mainly, do you? And you'll be terrified here, or flush draws. I love this turn raise, the more I think about it, I love the idea of raising the turn. I might have gone a bit bigger, like I say, to max value from flush draws, and also just to make sure that we try and get the fold equity now from the ace queen, ace king, ace jack region, which I think you will most of the time, to be honest, against the reg. These stakes, yeah, I actually kind of love this. This is insane. This is sick, but I think it's pretty nice. All right, this hand gets an 8. Okay, pocket kings on the button here. Hand number 6, we've got off to a very good start. Halfway through, can Jay keep it going? Call from the small blind and the big blind. King 10-5 rainbow, check, check. I just don't think you're going to make a ton of money here by checking. I think that gutters are going to call anyway or raise you. Like, there's still some king x in range, there's 10x in range. Just bet here. I don't like the check here. I think this is like definitely FPSy, like fancy play syndrome. It's a three-way pot. There's just so much stuff you can still build pot against here. I don't think you should check here. I don't think it's the case that, like, because you checked back, you're now making a ton of money from people on the turn and river that you wouldn't have made by betting the flop. Like, sure, at some point they're quite likely to fold, but you may as well bet now while queen jack is in range, while 10x is in range, before the board gets straighty or gets any worse. I think you've got a better chance of getting value now in this spot than you do later. And there are still opportunities to get 3 streets against king 5 and the big blind, or king jack or something. There is still a king out there and there's 2 opponents that can have it. So while it's discounted, it's not totally blocked or impossible. Definitely hate the flop check here, actually. This is the first thing I've hated. I think urgency is just way too high here, deep stacked. 3-way, go ahead and bet your hand. Villain leads big. Now, you do block most of the continuing range here if you raise, so raising doesn't seem ideal. Min raising is going to do enough to scare this player off a lot of the time without actually netting that much against this player. I think if I was going to raise, I would just raise bigger. But I'm leaning towards call here, just because there's a player here that I want to call with like a 10 or a king or something like that. If I did raise, I think I'd just raise bigger and hope this guy has queen jack or king x or king queen or king jack or something like that. But I think call is the main play here. I don't think this achieves enough, and it just scares this player out of the pot. A few times I've seen Jay take a line that puts a little bit more money in the pot and achieves something bad, like reopening the action or making this player fold a king, but doesn't actually achieve enough like value. So I just don't like these really small raises that we're making all over the place. I think sizing's a bit of an issue, actually. Jack river, we go for a bet here. Yeah, I mean, just going for some kind of sizing with the blocker to 2-pair and top pair, like sizing it down makes some sense. I mean, I don't really love the sizing on turn or the idea of turn. I don't really love the flop. I'm going to give this hand a 3. I just don't like this hand. I don't like the flop check here. I think it's actually just leaking some money. People aren't just going to start bluffing you for 2 streets and overbetting river because you check the flop. And furthermore, any hand they do start leading turn with is usually a hand that's calling flop, right? It's not like they just lead 9-8 on the turn because you checked in a 3-way pot on this texture. Not normally anyway, given this hand a 3. Okay, hand number 7, we have ace jack off in the big blind. There's an open, there's a call. I think just calling here, yeah, squeezing the suited variant sometimes is fine. Against UTG, I'm not really a fan of squeezing here. And we go for a lead on the flop, which I don't absolutely hate. I do think people see bet a bit too wide, but probably not 3-way on a monotone board. So this makes some sense, just ensuring some pot growth against this player. I don't mind this at all. You have to be careful as a coach because like your first instinct to say that's non-standard, it's bad, don't donk bet here, could just be based on like cultural norms, and it might just be like groupthink, and it might not be very valuable. Because this really can't be bad, right, in terms of EV if you think about it. It's not a problem. We get called in 2 spots. I think this is a little big for like our purposes here. Like we lose to most of the ace-x that's offsuit in the under the guns range. We're going to lose to now because it's ace 10, ace queen, ace king. There's still the chance that this player had like some kind of slow play. And yeah, we're leading into 2 players. I think if I was going to lead the turn again here, I would just lead like really small or check. I think 5.2 big blinds is actually a bit too much for our hand. So again, a slight sizing concern here. And I think this is now just a check. Yeah, I think this is a polarization mistake. I just don't think that we have enough equity to value bet into 2 players here. I think we're pretty clearly a dog when called here. Not by this player, but by this player for sure we're a dog when called. And I don't see them folding this node. They actually raise. This call is just leaking a ton of money. This is just a really bad, this is a really bad hand. Yeah, this hand's abysmal. Like we've gone ahead and actually made a polarization error on both the turn and the river, and then we've called off in a spot that's basically just never ever bluffed. Like I'll be so shocked if we win here. I'll be so shocked because like this guy has to worry about this fish behind and has filtered twice. and now needs to be bluffing like kings with a spade, queens with a spade, etc. I mean, they might be, but I really don't think, unless you have a really good read on the player, I don't think you can make this call at these stakes. Pocket sevens, yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm going to give this hand I think that river call's horrendous, honestly. And I think the river bet's pretty bad, and I think the turn bet's too big. I'm going to give this hand a 1.5 out of 10. I think this hand's pretty butchered. I think Jay has a lot of potential, and I can see why he's had a good start to his poker career and why he's winning and why his red line is so good, but he needs to learn when to rein it in and when his hand is too weak for the investment he's actually making, because you can leak a lot of money in that way. I think, by the way, guys, this is a monumentous moment in Gauntlet history. I think that's the worst score we've assigned to a hand yet. 1.5 out of 10. Congratulations, Jay. You've had a great start, but you've got the wooden spoon on this one. All right, hand 8. Okay, we are big blind versus small blind. Hand 8, we have Jack 10 off. We're going to call here. 9-7-3, villain checks. I think I would just start blasting. I think in this pool, one of the biggest exploits, and this is something we discussed quite a bit in the course, cash injection spots where opponents are way too capped, where you can just be applying a ton of pressure and gaining way more fold equity than you ought to get at equilibrium. And this is one of these spots where when they check here, they're just forgetting to check the good stuff pretty frequently. And all sizes are good here. Small is good, bigger is good as well. There's lots of stuff you can do in this spot. Villain calls, and we turn a straight. I think our hand is huge here. Probably in theory, you're allowed to slow play this spot, but you're usually meant to bet. In practice, I'm always betting. I think in position urgency is just really high. The opponent's range is just really capped. I think you've got a very, very good hand here. And most of the hands that are going to fold the turn aren't going to invest the river anyway if you check, because they're just some like showdown value hand, like ace-7 of diamonds or something. And meanwhile, villain can still have like over pairs, 9x, 2 pair, just like tons of hands, like big club, tons of hands that just invest by calling more than they do by bluffing river. Hate that. Hate that check. I think Jay has this backwards sometimes where like he's very happy to turn stuff into bluffs and attack and aggress, but then he's just not getting enough value at all. Like the blue line is really suffering, and it will suffer because Jay's bluffing so much and bluffing in a lot of good spots, but we've got to be getting value as well, otherwise we're leaving half of our win rate on the table, right? Just got to bet here. I now bet river pretty big. Yeah, okay, I like the sizing on the river. Don't like the turn check though, and so I'm going to give this hand a 3.5 out of 10. I think we just need to be betting the turn here. Okay, hand number 9. We've had a couple of bad hands now in a row. I wonder if we can get back onto a winning streak here and get some high scores. We have 8-7 of spades. We go for the open, blind versus blind. I think check raise is good here against pool, against the random fish. It's a pretty good line. Bet's okay. You can't really fault bet either. I think both plays are all right. Definitely always betting turn here because I don't want to bluff by check raising. I don't want to check call. And I don't want to check fold. So when you can kind of eliminate all of the other lines, bet just becomes the front runner. And it's kind of the thing that you have to do. This is like frail hand out of position with too much equity not to bet, because there's just no other good way of investing. Okay, you could check raise hands like this at some frequency in theory probably, but at this stack depth against a recreational player, I just think I prefer betting. I don't love check raising this hand, reopening with a jammable amount left. I think I just prefer betting. Check raise probably isn't horrible though. We go for the sizing. I think that's a good size. Yep, makes a lot of sense. Villain calls again. Okay, so villain's range is now just going to be... There's going to be some stuff like Queen Jack in there, King Queen, that's like folding on this node, like for sure. But for the most part, villain is going to have a 10, a 9, a counterfeited 4, some ace high. If villain has an ace, I think your fold equity is terrible here against the rec player. And you're actually going to be winning against 6s and 5s and 4-5 and stuff like that anyway. So this looks like a check. I think the 8 high actually has a fair degree of showdown value on this node. And I think that recreational players sometimes don't realize that they have to bluff this spot, right? That's like an action sequence where you don't just get to showdown. I hope you guys realize that. If not, definitely look at River Blunder Theorem from the Carrot Poker School. Very important theorem, one of the most important ones that we actually dish out in the school. We do check. I like it. I like the river check a lot. We might well win here. Okay, we chop. Yeah, see, we've just got a lot of showdown value with the 8 here. You wouldn't think so, right? But there are just like a chunk of hands that we win against, and the ones that we lose to just really aren't folding because they're ace high, 9x, 10x, etc. Mostly, there's a bit of fold equity from Queen Jack exactly and stuff like that. I just don't believe that's enough of the opponent's range. Overall, I think this is a really well played hand. And I love the turn sizing, and I love the river check, and I'm going to give this hand a 7.5, because I don't think it's like a difficult enough hand to get a really high score, but it was played really well. And on to the final hand of the video, hand number 10. This has been a really enthralling one. Like, some of Jay's play has been a little bit dicey, but a lot of it has been super impressive and non-standard and thinking outside of the box. Open here on the bottom with Jack 10 off, and we go to a flop against a small blind caller, probably a recreational player of Jack 9-5. I'm quite a fan of just checking this hand, because I think recreational players, when they're in heads-up pots, I think their probing strategy is just a little bit like, well, a lot out of line. Effectively, they're leading too many random pairs, they're leading too many draws, they're leading too many reasonable hands, too many horrible hands. They might just lead the turn with ace-6 of hearts sometimes, stuff like that. I think just giving them a bit of rope on this flop is probably better. I play like an overbet check sort of strategy on flops like this usually, but I don't hate other sizes here as toolkits. I just think checking this particular hand against the rec player is probably just a bit better. Not going to mark down the c-bet load, so there's no way it's like a big mistake or something. I think I'm just getting greedy here, going for 3 streets. Again, I wouldn't slow play this node, even though in theory it's optional that you bet. I think it becomes mandatory in practice, where people are just too passive, missing mandatory bluffs on river, calling a 9 all the time on the turn, calling a pocket pair again here a lot. I think I'd just be betting the turn here. Don't like the check. As played, this is a really, really weird node, because like the opponent's 5x, 8, 7, 6s, 4s, 3s, like the last hand, have just been totally annihilated and counterfeited. Therefore, you might want to do something smaller and juicy here, because a 9 is going to raise you anyway if you go small enough, right? And ace high is going to call. The question is, what's the right sizing? My instinct is that like smaller is better here. There just isn't a target range that's calling you for a big bet here that isn't also raising, apart from maybe a few ace-x combos. And if you do go small enough, sometimes fish just try and get you off a chop or something silly with ace-x anyway. I love this. This is a really good sizing. I really, really like this bet on the river. Now villain probably has a 9 a lot, has a jack sometimes, has nothing sometimes. We click it back. I think this is good. You could go a bit bigger though. You might be missing out on a bit of value from a 9 here. I think the way I would think about this is as follows. The chances of your opponent 4-bet spewing over this with a bluff are basically 0, unless the player is an absolute maniac, which we don't really have any data on that in the sample that I've got. And therefore, just maximizing against the 9 here seems way better than hoping that, like, by making it really minuscule, you cause some kind of spew. I think I'd go bigger here. So I'm torn on this hand. Villain folds. I don't like the turn check at all. I really love the river sizing. And then I don't really like this sizing here, although I obviously like 3-betting. I think I'm going to give this hand a 5.5, because there's some really good stuff in here. Like, the small river bet's very, very good. Like, Jay's really understanding the villain's range composition here. But the rest of the hand, like the sizing at this point and then the turn line, I'm just not in love with it. I think it's like fancy play syndrome. I think Jay is like, a lot of his fancy play is good, but he needs to just tone it down in quite a few spots. Okay, so this hand, what did I say, gets a 5.5, right? Yeah, I'll give this hand a 5.5. That means, ladies and gents, that the final score for Jay is 52.5 out of 100. That puts Jay, I believe, second place in the 25NL Poker Gauntlet standings. Overall, this player was really fun to watch. Like, a lot of really good stuff going on here, non-standard stuff, but a bit erratic, a bit too much spew, maybe not enough like foundational knowledge of like what theory says you should do, like where it's just important to get value. Definitely not getting enough value or going big enough for value or winning a big enough pot with value hands. I think that's the biggest leak. But a lot of really imaginative, cool bluffing and definitely identifying spots where fold equity is nice and high exploitatively. Alright guys, hope you've enjoyed. Check out carrotcorner.com now for all of our other content, our subscription service, and our premium courses. Don't forget that you can get 3 months subscription free when you pick up our full scholarship. And yeah, or the theory scholarship, that works too. And yeah, we're going to do loads more episodes of Poker Gauntlet. Let me know what you think of it. Hit the like button if you like the series, and we will create more. See you next time.